Ever since crashing into the lagoon from a reckless shortage of pixie dust, Annabelle had been reevaluating her loyalties. It was harder to serve royalty than she had thought, and she'd never deluded herself about it being easy. Still, it would be better if she could believe in the potentate's worthiness and assign the greater blame to Tinsel. She had to serve the potentate well because she had sworn an oath and because she was like a queen and could lock Annabelle up forever if she wanted to. More importantly, she knew her father's story was somehow wound up with Fairy. She would finish this job, but there was no one to dictate how best to do it. Annabelle wasn't Wendy Darling, nor did she want to be. She could just as well have scrubbed floors and darned stockings out of heel in Mrs. Holmes' basement. Besides, there was another way of going about things, one that was simpler, easier, and not to be disparaged, more fun. She glanced about the hideout, strewn with torn and soiled clothing, then looked down at her apron. The pots and pans could take care of themselves for now. But there was one task that needed doing before she could be quite comfortable. Fetch had said the mermaids were going to bury Annabelle alive at sea. All things considered, it seemed wiser to steer clear of them, but Annabelle hated to let a bunch of girls with tuna tails scare her. Besides, it was clear the Lost Boys weren't going to roll over and accept her into their so-called brotherhood without a challenge. So she needed an ally, or maybe several. Also, she needed to show off, not because she liked to. Pulling stunts was dumb as bricks, but she'd watched enough boys roughhousing in the street below Mrs. Holmes' roof deck. She knew how boys did dangerous stunts so that they could pull rank and lord it over the other boys. Annabelle needed rank, so she'd have to figure out a good stunt that would impress them. Something really impressive, something valuable. But first, she had to swap out her yellow dress for something she could move in. Beautiful as the yellow dress was, it wasn't practical. Annabelle surveyed the hideout. It really was a wreck. Piles of dirty laundry covered practically every bare spot of floor. She could find plenty to wear all right, but the Lost Boys' dirty trousers might draw every fly on the island. She sniffed an undershirt. It smelled like beach logs and smoke, but that wasn't too bad. A pair of mostly clean trousers had a hole in the gusset that she could put her fist through. They would fit, but she'd have to sew the gusset shut. She sighed. Just as well she'd brought that sewing kit from Fairy. She sat down on a toadstool-crusted stump and took the thimble out of the pocket. Minutes later, she examined her work. Not bad, really. The fly didn't stay flat, but like her father would have said, no one would notice from the back of a galloping horse. She hopped out of her dress and into the good-as-new trousers. Then she tripped out of the hideout and down the hill toward Never's Lagoon. A row of betel nut trees grew tall and spindly at the jungle edge. The lagoon's pure turquoise water lapped the pebbled shoreline with a soft shush-shushing of foam. Offshore, a smallish island rose up within the lagoon. It was almost a rock and not an island. It had no trees or shade, but a number of figures lay down on the rock, sunning themselves. They flipped their tails every once in a while, shaking off a spray of water that refracted the light into miniature rainbows. A lulling song floated over from the rock island. It was a beautiful song, like she imagined a young mother would sing to her baby. Annabelle distrusted women singing. She had never known her own mother and had no memory of lullabies. Legends told some pretty hair-raising stories about merfolk, but Annabelle didn't fear the fish part. It was the maid part that got her. Boys could be strange and contrary, but they were mostly nothing to be afraid of. Girls, Girls, on the other hand, were scary in ways boys were not. While they seemed very nice when by themselves, in large numbers, there were no guarantees. Girls could do cruel things, like laugh at the color of your shirt, or the ruffle on your collar, or worse, they could pretend to be your friend. But when the teacher told them that you were a traitor's spawn, they would drop you like a hot coal, and then tell everyone all of your deepest, darkest secrets. Then they could look you in the eye and laugh. Annabelle hesitated at the edge of the lagoon, and for the first time, she was grateful for the tugging sensation her oaths to the potentate worked upon her insides. And she knew she needed these mermaids. She needed first to win them over, and then to win over the Lost Boys. And so she coiled her braids around her head and tucked them in so they wouldn't come loose in the water. And she dipped one toe into the gently folding waves. The water was nice, She took a deep breath of air and launched into the lagoon. Head down, she kicked her feet and struck the water, rotating her arms and pulled, stroke by stroke, out to the rock island. Annabelle struggled up the pebbled shore of the rock island, dripping lagoon water. The first thing she noticed was that the singing had stopped. Secondly, she noticed that no one was paying the least bit of attention to her. The mermaid's gazes had all rotated toward a mermaid with extravagantly long red hair. A mermaid sitting next to her had raised a sharp silver cutlass that glinted in the sun and had paused, ready to swing it down over the redhead. Annabelle's jaw dropped, and she screamed, "Don't do it!" The mermaid dropped her blade with a clatter down upon the rocks, and all gazes locked on her, the dripping wet human girl. "Please don't. You can't," Annabelle pleaded. A tear pricked her eyes and rolled down her cheek. The mermaid with the cutlass picked it up again and pointed it at Annabelle. "Aren't you the girl that crashed into the Sea of Dreams lately?" Of course, she couldn't say when it happened because time calculation in Never was horribly backwards. Annabelle gave a little nod and fidgeted. Water dripped down her scalp into her eyes. "You escaped the Lost Boys' clutches, which is just as well. Everyone knows they don't play fair with girls. What is your problem now? Haven't you ever seen a girl get a haircut?" "Yes, I mean, no, I've never seen a mermaid get a haircut, and I'm sorry to see it now. Mermaid hair is so beautiful. It's like treasure, shining with red and gold and silver highlights. You can't cut it. It's too glorious." Annabelle folded her own dripping braids out of its knot for a comparison, and the mermaids couldn't help but shake their heads at the difference. "But you see what a mess my hair is made of this heart. Just look at it." The redhead lifted a small golden heart tangled in bronze and crimson tresses. And it was true. The hair was strung through the harp in an uncomfortable net of tangle. The obvious thing to do was to cut the hair. Undeterred, Annabelle tossed her braid over her shoulder. "I can get it out, and then I'll braid it for you." The mermaid seemed amused by the suggestion. "But your hair and braids will be so much more lovely than mine." Annabelle knew mermaids were sly, with a very mixed reputation in fairy tales, but she also had a hunch they were vulnerable to human flattery, and she put her heart into gushing over them from head to tail, so to speak. And before she or they knew what was happening, she sat perched on a rock behind the red-headed mermaid, braiding her hair into an elaborate style that Mrs. Holmes' lady's maid had taught her. "Isn't that better?" The mermaids stared for a moment. One by one they smiled. A blonde mermaid reached a hand out to touch the woven hand. As a group, they broke out in a chorus of, "Braid mine next!" At last, Annabelle exhaled and stretched her arms and neck. There was a lesson in all of this. Never underestimate the power of a good hairstyle.